the most famous traveler of all. When people talk of famous journeys long ago, one of the first names that you hear is Marco Polo. He was the greatest traveler of his time. In the centuries that followed, travels to the east and to other parts of the world learned many useful things from his long journey to China. Today, many people enjoy visiting other countries as tourists, and they return with stories of interesting things in faraway places. Marco Polo was perhaps the first tourist, a traveler who came home after many years and wrote a wonderful book about his exciting journey. We know a lot about Marco Polo and his travels. He came from a rich family of merchants in the city of Venice, in modern-day Italy, and the journey to China and lived there for a long time. Most of these things are in his book, which is called The Description of the World. It became very famous in different countries all over Europe. But there are also many things that we do not know about Marco Polo. For example, nobody knows much about his early years in Venice and his family life in China is a mystery. He lived there for 17 years, but did he have a wife or a child there? Marco Polo wasn't the first European to go to China, but he was the first person to write about daily life there. He told Europeans about new things such as paper money and gunpowder. He also wrote a wonderful description of the Mongol people who ruled over many countries at this time. Marco Polo was the first person to describe the long journey to the east on the famous Silk Road. We sometimes hear about this route today. Tourists who are looking for an adventure can pay for an exciting Silk Road holiday. But what was the Silk Road, and what was it like in Marco Polo's time? The Silk Road was a 6,500-kilometer long road between China and Europe. It started in the 2nd century BC, and it was very important at the time of Marco Polo. Traders used the route to bring silk, spices, and many other things to Europe from the east. Traders could move from place to place on the Silk Road and buy and sell things as they traveled. But life on the road was hard and dangerous. Merchants like Marco Polo often joined together in large groups called caravans to protect themselves against the thieves along the route. Marco Polo's book, The Description of the World, tells us about his long journey to China and back on the Silk Road. But a small number of people think that he didn't really go to China. He just wrote down stories from other travelers, because Marco didn't describe the Great Wall of China or talk about other important things like tea. They think that he didn't travel or live there. But most people think that Marcus' long description of his journey to the east is true. Only a visitor to China could learn so much about Chinese people and the places. Early years in Venice. Nicola and Maffeo Polo, Marcus' father and uncle, belonged to a family of merchants from the city of Venice. They were important traders who bought and sold goods from different places around the world. At this time, Venice was a rich city which traded with countries near the Mediterranean Sea and also faraway places in Africa and Asia. Big ships arrived daily full of goods like silk, spices, and jewels, and the sailors speaking different languages often walked the streets of the city. In 1253, Nicola and Maffeo left Venice and went on a long journey to Constantinople. Constantinople, now Istanbul, to trade. While the brothers were away, Nicola's son Marco was born. People say that his mother died while Marco was still a baby, and he went to live with other people in his family. Nicola and Maffeo were away for many years. It was not unusual for merchants to trade in other countries and not come home for a long time. Travel was often very dangerous, and some merchants never made the long journey back to their families. We don't know a lot about Marco when he was a child. Who was his mother? Did he have any brothers or sisters? Nobody really knows. But we can imagine that he had a very comfortable early life. We know that he learned to read and write the Italian of his time and also used numbers. As the son of a rich merchant family, he possibly went to church, school, or perhaps a teacher came to his house. Marco's family home was in the center of Venice, and the city was a very busy and exciting place to live. Perhaps Marco watched the huge ships come and go with their large boxes full of valuable goods, or, or he talked to some of the sailors and listened to their stories about different places. Perhaps he sat near the water and waited for his father to return. But it was many years before Nicola and Maffeo came home. Nicola and Maffeo Polo. People often think of Marco Polo as the most famous traveler of his time, but it's important to remember that Marco's father and uncle traveled to the east before him. Without the early journey of Nicola and Maffeo Polo, we cannot imagine the travels of Marco and his book, The Description of the World. Nicola and Maffeo left Venice for Constantinople in 1253. They sailed from the city in large ships full of goods to trade. At this time, travel by sea was dangerous, dirty, and very uncomfortable. So the brothers were surely pleased to arrive at last in Constantinople. This great city was an important center for merchants from around the world. The brothers traded busily here for 6 years and bought a lot of jewels. But after some fighting between different groups in the city, the Polos decided to leave and take their jewels with them. The brothers first sailed to Sudak and modern-day Ukraine. They wanted to return to Venice, but travel from here was too dangerous, so they began to move east along the north route of the Silk Road. The roads were safer and in this area because they were under the rule of the Mongols. On the journey, the brothers bought and sold goods like salt, animal skins, gold, and spices. They traveled to Syria in a place now called Astrakhan. This was summer home of the Mongol ruler Barka Khan and his people. When the Polos first met Barka Khan, they gave him their jewels from Constantinople as a present, but the ruler then gave them twice the number of jewels in return. The brothers, who were now rich, stayed in Syria for a year and traded. They then traveled to the famous Silk Road city of Bukhara in modern-day Uzbekistan. More fighting meant that they couldn't go further or return home, so they worked there as merchants for 3 years. By luck, they met an ambassador in Bukhara who was going to visit the great Mongol ruler of China, Kublai Khan. The ambassador agreed to take the two men to China to meet the Khan. In 1264, the Polos arrived at Kublai Khan's palace in Khanbalik, or modern-day Beijing. It was now 11 years since they first left Venice. Later, in the description of the world, Marco talked about his famous meeting between the Polos and the Kublai Khan. We learned that the great ruler was very interested to hear about the rest of the world. He asked the brothers about the Pope, the Christian Church, and the different rulers in Europe. The Han liked Nicola and the Mafia. The brothers stayed in China for 2 years and learned to speak the Mongol language well. But in the end, they wanted to return home. Kublai Khan agreed and he gave the two men a beautiful gold passport. With this, they could travel freely in the larger Mongol Empire and always get food and a place to sleep along the road. Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Jerusalem. But before the brothers left, the Khan asked them to take a message to the Pope and to return to China with 100 Christian priests. He also asked for some of the special oil from the famous Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Nicola and the Mafia agreed and they said that they would return as soon as possible. After a 3-year journey along the Silk Road, the brothers arrived at Accra, a town on the Mediterranean Sea. There they learned that the Pope was dead and they couldn't take the Khan's message to him, so they sailed straight home to Venice to the their families. In 1269, Nicola and Maffeo arrived in Venice, 16 years after they began their journey. But life was now very different. Nicola's wife was long dead, and he had a 15-year-old son called Marco. Perhaps it was difficult for Marco to meet his new father and for Nicola to meet his new son. We can only imagine. But Nicola and Maffeo's return was surely a time for telling stories of the East, stories about the great Mongol Empire and the Silk Road. The Mongol Empire. The Polo family was some of the first Europeans to meet and describe the great Mongol rulers of their time like Kublai Khan and Barka Khan. But who were the Mongols and what was the Mongols empire? In the beginning, the Mongols were different groups of people who moved around Central Asia. They were men and women who rode from place to place to look for good for their animals. They lived in warm tents called gagjers, or jers. Look how it reads, which were made from animal skins. In 1206, the great Mongol leader Genghis Khan brought together these different Mongol groups and conquered the north of China and much of Central Asia. By the time of Genghis Khan's grandson Kublai Khan, the Mongols ruled a huge empire. It went from the Sea of Japan in the east to modern day Turkey and Hungary in the west. It was the largest land empire of all time. Just 2,000 Mongols ruled more than 100 million people. The empire went across 22% of the world's land. There were 4 different areas of the Mongol Empire at this time, and Kublai Khan ruled over the empire of the Great Khan. They started at Lake Baikal in the north and went down through China to the modern-day country of Myanmar in the south. It also went from Korea in the east to Tibet in the west. Genghis Khan and his court. How did the Mongols conquer so many different countries? Firstly, they were very strong soldiers who could ride fast and fight for hours at a time. When necessary, they burned towns and the villages to the ground. Secondly, the Mongols were not only good soldiers, but they were also successful rulers. They ruled their new empire well and they protected visitors from other countries. This was very important to travelers on the Great Silk Road. Without the strong rule of the Mongols, travelers like the Polos couldn't make the journey to China and back safely. The Mongols were also interested in learning from the people they ruled. For example, the Mongols sent letters very quickly from one place to another in their empire. They learned this from the Chinese. There were letter stations every 40 kilometers on important routes, and the riders were always ready to carry letters from one station to the next. And the Mongols were open to different religions. We can see this In Nicole and Maffei's meeting with Kublai Khan and the great rulers, questions about Christianity and his message to the Pope. The Mongols were most important in the years between 1200 and 1300. Marco Polo's book, The Description of the World, gives us one of the best pictures of daily life in this huge and successful empire. The Silk Road. Next time. Okay, guys, you will watch part 2. It's enough for today. Thank you for watching and listening. Goodbye.